Hi, my name's Cameron. I'm cycling a tandem bicycle from the northern tip of North America to the southern tip of South America, with the rear seat occupied by the people I meet along the way. This is the Random Tandem, Episode 2. Back when I was planning this trip, I always wondered how much of it I'd wind up doing with company versus how much I would do on my own. In the end, I guess it would probably wind up being about half and half, with a lot of the alone time coming in the more remote areas, where finding partners would be tough. Well, for these last 3 months, I've spent them riding around the countryside of Alaska and Canada. It's been absolutely stunning, but not exactly an easy source of riding partners. So if episode 1 was all about learning how to ride the tandem with others, then this one is about learning how to do it on my own. Except it didn't start out like that. After Danny and I completed our journey down the Dalton Highway, I stayed with him for a while, mostly to enjoy Fairbanks with him and his lovely family, but also to put some feelers out about finding someone who'd like to jump on the bike next. After 2 weeks with no luck, I accepted that I'd be on my own, so I packed my bags, ready to leave first thing the following morning, when
I saw news of your adventure in the paper a few weeks ago and thought it was such a cool thing to be doing. I was interested in joining if you still need someone. Cheers! Hope to hear back. Kaya.
So yeah, the absolute 11th hour, we got another rider. Fantastic.
My name is Kaya Victorino. I'm 22 and I'm from Fairbanks, Alaska.
Kaya had seen the story that had been written about us in the local newspaper, and despite not having done a bike trip before, she jumped at the idea. A few hours later, and we'd made our plan to head southwest through the Denali National Park before zigzagging back up to the Alaska Highway and crossing over into Canada. This route added more than 400 extra kilometres when compared to the most direct option, but with the weather forecast showing a week of consistent rain, we thought it might be nice to at least be able to escape the highways. We left Fairbanks on a blue skied Saturday, both feeling in top spirits and hoping that maybe the weather forecasters had made one big mistake. They had not. But still, after the previous brutal stretch with Danny, it was going to take more than a little rain to dampen my spirits, because being back on the smooth and gently undulating pavement felt like heaven. Well, it felt like heaven to me at least, because as much as Kaya was loving being outdoors and being on the bike, her legs were not feeling the same way.
First up, day 2 into your very first long distance bike ride, and you're killing it. So congrats. So how are you feeling at 7 o'clock this morning?
Oh my gosh. I don't think I've ever felt my body feel like that. I looked down at my legs expecting to see like huge pulsing veins after yesterday, but of course they just look normal. Good luck to you.
A couple of days later, we said farewell, and I dropped her off at the nearest train station before continuing on through Denali. At this point, I'd reached 1,100 kilometres, yet this was the first time that I'd be setting out on my own on the tandem. It really surprised me how unstable the bike felt after I got so used to balancing it for 2 people. And with the sudden change and now being alone, combined with the rainy days and maximum temperatures of about 5 degrees Celsius, my motivation really waned, and my daily distance dropped down to be about half of what it had previously. I'll tell you about my current dilemma. I have really underestimated how tricky it'll be to cycle a tandem bicycle on my own. But now, for 3 days in a row, 2 days ago, yesterday and today, I've done between 50 and 60 kilometres. Now that would be a mild annoyance if it wasn't for this stuff. Not specifically carrot and onion, but food in general. Because I don't have enough food to be cycling 50 to 60 k's a day. In fact, these 3 last days where I've gone not very far means that my extra 2 days worth of food that I had for this journey to Toke has now been used up. I do need to be able to push myself more. At the moment I'm just not. So anyway, it's my current dilemma. From prior bike rides, I was somewhat expecting this feeling to come, and I brought myself out of it by setting myself little goals, like finding interesting objects, looking for animals, and searching for one particular flower that Kaya had told me about.
So we got this plant called birdvetch and brought it over and planted it everywhere, and it really took off. And it definitely fixes nitrogen into the soil, but it's also an invasive species, so I'm sure you'll see some of it as you continue on.
How do I see it? What do I look for?
It's almost like a cattail. Do you know what that is? So you know what a corn dog looks like? But it's that shape of a corn dog, but it's much smaller. And the petals are really small, like flecks almost, going up the corn dog shape. And it's a blue, purple to pink flower, and then vines spreading all over from it.
I think he's just watching me. And I'm watching him.
Yeah, we'll see where that description gets you. You'll probably see it and be like,
It's 4 days since I dropped Kaya off, but I think I've found your flower. Isn't that just beautiful? After a week of winding my way through the gravel roads of Denali, the clouds parted, the days warmed, and I started having some really wonderful days. I managed to get back up to doing around 100 kilometres per day and quickly found myself falling into routine. Wake up, make myself some porridge and coffee, and have a look around the area to see if I can find any berries to have with breakfast. Wash up, pack up camp, get changed, and then find a good podcast, audiobook or album to listen to and get on the road. Ride for a few hours while stopping to look at some interesting things along the way, then find a spot for lunch, ideally somewhere where I can go for a swim. Back on the bike from there. Hopefully I'm listening to something interesting, but if not, I'll find other ways to entertain myself, like finding something interesting to memorise or just watching the world go by. I try not to be on busy roads past sunset, that's never fun. Then once I've found a spot to sleep, I'll cook myself some dinner, have a hot chocolate, read for a little while, and then doze off, ready to do it all again the next day. I mention this because a few people I've met have assumed that for better or worse, I'm out here living a life void of routine. But the lifestyle difference between being here and being at home is not an absence of routine. It's just that it exists within a changing setting and in the changing company of others. Today I'll be crossing my first of many borders from Alaska into Canada. On day 47, I met 3 of those others on the road I wound up spending the next week with. There was Dennis and Katya,
Hello!
a German couple who had taken a year off to cycle around much of the world together, and Paul, a Canadian who was attempting to travel the 3,000 kilometre journey from Fairbanks, Alaska to Calgary, Canada on a skateboard. We all met by chance, and when we realised that we were headed in the same direction, we made plans to meet up at the end of each day. Although before our first day of travelling together, we were all dying to give each other's forms of travel a try.
Bloody hard.
For the next few days, the 4 of us would begin each morning together, with Dennis and Katya quickly pulling ahead, Paul dropping behind, and me being in the middle. Then come the evening, I'd arrive at camp an hour or two after Dennis and Katia, and then many hours behind me, sometimes at nearly midnight, Paul would roll in, frazzled and exhausted.
Just living the freaking dream! It's also raining a bit.
Paul's trip was a real enigma to me, and for a couple of days I hung back with him so that we could make our way down the highway together.
Pop it up. One. Oh! Oh no. You okay? Yeah. Yep, everything's together. My name is Paul Kent. I live in Calgary and I am 40 years old. Is there much of an origin to the skateboard as the mode of transport? Was that always like your favourite childhood thing to do?
I
or
wouldn't
anything
say
like
that. Actually, no, I was more of a cyclist. My bikes became really terrible to get around on, like no bike seats. The highest gear, I would be going like this to be moving at a running pace. So I started longboarding to work, and I worked pretty far away. Started doing downhill races, was really good at the starts. The guys asked me to go do a race in Vancouver, and I didn't have money for a bus ticket. So I worked at an outdoor gear store, put on a backpack, and skateboarded to Vancouver from Calgary to do the race. And I was the top Canadian. I got beaten out by the best pusher in the world at the time. But push race up Seymour Mountain, and then you come down it. So from there, I decided to next thing. Why not find the hardest paved bit of road I could find in the world that I think I could maybe skateboard and do that. So then I went from Lima, Peru to Potosí, Bolivia.
Wow.
Through 3 ranges of Andes Mountains. So, and then with that came the support that I needed to afford to race more and to do more travel.
It was lovely. How good was that downhill? My God.
It was hard to do the whole thing. I was so tired. I got like 3/4 of the way down and I couldn't do it anymore.
I was thinking of you the whole way down. I was thinking, is this too steep for him? Like, is he gonna...
Oh no!
After a few lovely days together, the 4 of us rolled into the town of Whitehorse, where each of our paths diverged. From here, Dennis and Katia veered off to the west, headed for a ferry that would take them down the coast. Paul continued south on the Alaska Highway, putting in some massive days on the board to reach Calgary in time, and I veered off onto the quiet and remote Cassiar Highway. Once I turned off onto the Cassiar, the whirring of passing traffic faded away as the numbers of cars I'd see each day reduced from thousands to only a small handful. There were now hundreds of kilometres between each town, and not much beyond mountains, lakes and animals between them. With this isolation came a real feeling of connectedness with the land that I was riding through. I felt incredibly at peace, which came easily when the days were warm, windless, and I was treated to some of the most spectacular scenery I'd seen yet. It still had its trying moments though. On day 58 of the trip, a truck drifted into the bike lane and passed roughly 10 centimetres from my left shoulder. This really rattled me, and I needed to pull over and shout at some bushes for a couple of minutes before continuing on. But then 2 hours later, appearing on the road ahead of me like it had fallen from heaven, was the exact object I needed to help prevent these scares in the future.
Alright, so I've just pulled over because there's something on the side of the road back here, and I think I know exactly what it is. It is, and that is now exactly what I'm going to do. Thank you. As Danny said when he was eating the blueberry pie, the road provides, the road giveth and the road taketh away.
The road gives and the road takes.
It had been made by an unknown bike tourist ahead of me, and it's essentially a flag that you hang off the lane side of your bike to force cars to give you a little more room when passing. As for another struggle up here, the mosquitoes are insane.
Absolutely insane.
In fact, so much so that my legs stopped swelling around individual bites and and started to swell as a whole. In any photo of me during this time, my legs are usually a fairly sorry sight. As I continued through northern Canada, human interaction often came rarely and usually in the form of workers on the roadside. Sometimes they let me ride on through, and other times they put me in the tray and give me a lift.
This bike touring thing's a piece of cake.
But either way, it seemed like the sight of me was always the source of a good chuckle to those working there.
I know, it fell off!
After a few days of heading down the Cassiar Highway, I met Heiko, a German guy cycling the length of Canada from top to bottom. He and I were headed the same way for the next 700 kilometres, so we stuck together, quickly falling into a rhythm of sharing a meal in the morning, riding through the day, sometimes together and other times apart, and then having a swim, a game of cards, and a shared dinner before bed. We found some interesting things on our way down too, like a salmon ladder run by a small First Nations community, and a whole heap of other interesting animals. Everything was ticking along nicely, without incident, until the morning of day 66.
Okay, major snag just came up. So last night I put my food bag away from my tent, as you're meant to for bears, and I wake up this morning and go to get it and it's not there. Which is a big drama, because this is, for one, it was a nice bag full of, 7 days worth of food, but the other thing is there is not places to buy food just scattered all over this road. The last one was 1.5 days ride the other way over lots of hills, and if I don't find this bag, I've got to go backwards, buy all that food again, and then keep going. This really sucks. Also, this is now all the food that I have left. This little bag, I think it's even been nibbled on by some squirrels or something, because I certainly didn't make that hole. But it's not a time to be picky, I suppose.
The next supermarket to the south was around 500 kilometres away, but we worked out that if we split Heiko's remaining food and did a bit of rationing, that we'd just be able to make it there, so there was hope. But then 2 mornings later, we woke up to go and collect Heiko's food bag, only to discover that that too had now been stolen.
Could you tell me what happened this morning?
It's unfair that I am laughing now, because I'm really sad, but okay, it's an hour ago, so yeah, I wanted to do the same like Cam, and I do not need my food anymore. So my big bag was with dry food, 2 times the best ones I have left for the last days, and beef jerky and so much sweets, cookies, cakes, lemon cakes. Oh my god.
We had no idea who or what had taken our food, but now that we had nothing left, we knew that we were in a bit of a bind. In our efforts to figure out what to do next, we got talking to a lodge caretaker named Alan. He invited us inside, gave us some warm chicken soup, and made the very generous offer of giving us enough food to make it down to the next supermarket. Alan went above and beyond to help 2 people he'd never met, and he did so much more than we ever could have expected or hoped for, so I don't want to sound in any way unappreciative. But I suspect that he may have misunderstood the nature of our predicament slightly, because he sent us on our way stocked with a can of tomatoes, a packet of 2-minute noodles, and a carrot. So from here, we decided that there wasn't really anything else to do except to turn the bikes around, ride back to the nearest petrol station, and stock up with 5 to 6 days worth of sandwiches, chocolate bars, and soft drinks. We continued on, filled with thoughts of our elusive next warm meal, and I remained in disbelief that I'd now had yet another bear encounter without actually having seen one yet. The first occurred back in Denali National Park, when I woke up to find fresh bear tracks surrounding my tent, and since then I'd been hiding my food bag far away, and through the day giving any nearby bears plenty of warning that I was coming by riding along and practicing Spanish at full blast.
¿Cuándo piensas es el mejor tiempo para visitar?
But now we were pretty sure that they'd pinched our food, and here I was thinking that I might never actually get to see one of the buggers. But speak of the devil, because on the very same day that Heiko's bag disappeared, we had no less than 4 separate bear encounters. In one of them, the bear got such a fright at the sight of us that he turned tail and sprinted full speed straight up a tree to a height of around 20 metres.
Oh, I see him on the right side.
The following day, Heiko and I parted ways, with him headed to the west to catch a ferry, and me continuing on to the south. At this point, I was still very low on food, with not much more than a few chocolate bars in my bag. But then ahead of me, I saw a couple of cars pull over and wait. This wasn't quite anything new, as the sight of a tandem bike headed down the highway has been providing a source of interest for lots of passing cars who often pull over to say hi, and I'm often surprised to see that lots of them have somehow already heard of me.
The guy was traveling in Tandem and looking for someone.
Oh, you heard?
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
But in this case, it was something particularly special, because these were friends of Danny back in Alaska, and they'd been on the lookout for me to drop off a very special delivery of fruit, cheese, dried meats, and even a little bit of chocolate for me to add to my stash. It was more than enough for me alone, which was handy, as the next day I got to share it with Kyron, my next backseat partner, and the first one in over 2,000 kilometres. Kyron's a helicopter pilot, originally from New Zealand, who I'd also found through the website of Warm Showers. What's more, he had fresh legs and was keen as a bean for our ride. So for our single day of riding, we absolutely zoomed along, remaining in top gear for most of the day and arriving to his home in Smithers with most of the day still ahead of us. I stayed with Kyron for a few days, during which he was kind enough to take me for a flight over the mountains to the north. Looking down on these peaks and valleys with barely a road in sight, I really felt their absence from what I'd been doing thus far. Sure, I'd spent the last 2 months in some incredibly remote and beautiful landscapes, but always from the guide rail of a significant road or highway. In essence, I needed to ditch the bike for a while, so I got back on the road and continued my journey south, eventually making it to a farmhouse that was happy to mind my bike and gear for a week or two. From there, I caught a 7-hour train ride, followed by hitchhiking the rest of the way to the mountains out east. It was here that I got picked up by Adam and Darren, a local couple on their way back from a weekend of climbing. And when they discovered that both my waist size and shoe size were the same as Adam's, they jumped at the opportunity to head out climbing again and brought me along with them. My time in the Jasper and Banff National Parks was exactly what the doctor ordered, even if it did take a little bit of effort to escape the crowds at times. This desire for remoteness, combined with my general stinginess in avoiding the exorbitant accommodation rates, resulted in me spending a couple of nights sleeping behind the local church in Jasper. And when there was no one to leave my bags with through the day, I stashed them in the engine bay of some equipment nearby that looked relatively unused. During my one full day in Jasper, I went for a 39-kilometre walk to try and get to what seemed like the highest peak in the nearby area. 6 hours later, I reached the small white rock that represented the tippy top, despite knowing that I had a 5-hour descent ahead of me, which would get me back into town around midnight. I really couldn't have felt better.
Oh my word! Today's been a wonderful day. Bloody stoked. Absolutely stoked.
This hike bared striking resemblance to one that I did back on my first ever bike tour. It was 2017 and I'd convinced one of my best mates named Hugh to buy a touring bike and spend 3.5 months crossing Central and Western Europe with me. Right in the middle of that, we too ditched the bikes and went for an ill-prepared hike up a distant mountain, and just like this one, we arrived back around midnight, thoroughly exhausted and feeling absolutely stoked. I mention this for a couple reasons. One is that it was on this trip with Hugh, sitting in this campsite in Western France, that I came up with the idea for the trip that I'm doing now. But also because once I'd hitchhiked and trained my way back to my bicycle and I continued riding on, I was on the cusp of reaching a distance that I'd known was approaching for a long time. 3,654 kilometres. This was the distance that Hugh and I achieved during our 3.5 months together, and a couple of days after cycling onwards, I reached that same number. This should be a cause to celebrate, to call Hugh to see if he'd like to come and join me once more. Except in March this year, 3 months before I begun this journey, Hugh passed away. This distance, 3,654 kilometres, is something that belongs to the two of us. And to go beyond that on my own was not an easy thing to do. So I decided that when that number arrived, that I'd stop the bike, wherever that may be, and say hello to my friend. There's 4,000 Ks.
All these cows have been following me for the last 2 kilometers in this massive long field. And then when I stop, they stop to look at me. And then I keep going and they keep going next to me. It's really quite beautiful. And right now they're all mooing at me. And they're telling me to keep going. Alright guys.
At this point I was starting to get pretty close to passing out of Canada and back into the US. All that was left was the mountains to the north of Vancouver. As I approached them and their silhouettes grew larger, I decided that I'd try taking a shortcut to get to the famous Sea to Sky Highway. This shortcut would cut around 50 kilometres off the route that I originally thought I'd take, but in doing so it would head up and over the terrain that the highways were skirting around the base of. I was once again very thankful to be off the highway, and as I made my way down this back road, it gradually became thinner and thinner, then turned to gravel, and then I reached a sign that made it clear why I hadn't seen anyone else going this way.
What on earth is to come here? This is ridiculous. 14.
For reference, 14% means that for every 100 metres you travel horizontally, you travel 14 metres vertically. And on a 70 kilo bike, on my own, it proved to be sometimes doable, and other times not. It took me a little over 2 hours to cover those 5 kilometres.
Oh my god, is this the top?
But it all became worth it to see what was on the other side. I was now on the Sea to Sky Highway and was only a few days away from my next major stopping point in Vancouver. Overall, it's been a really wonderful first 3 months on the road. Alaska and Canada were every bit as rugged and beautiful as I was hoping they'd be, and with the exception of a couple of minor snags along the way, it's all going very much as well as I could have hoped for. This project has actually gathered a bit of steam now too, and I've had lots of people from all throughout the US reach out asking if they can jump on the bike for a stretch too, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes next. Thanks so much for watching this, and if you'd like to jump on the back of the bike with me at any point in the next year and a bit, just send me a message and I'd really love to chat with you. But for now, I'll leave you with day 105, arriving into Vancouver with my 2 most recent riding partners, Raymond and Elizabeth.